To be in that fight, flight, freeze space most of the time for your body, it wears it down. Absolutely. But the mind is also trained by that point to stay in that space of fight, flight, freeze. And so what part of the reason that it's so important to do it consistently when you are working to recover from a chronic illness is to change that pattern.
This is Doctor Talks.
I am so delighted you are here today. You are here for you. You are here for your own self-healing, your own wisdom, your own growth, your own transcendence. And by choosing to join this time together and the community of people who is prioritizing those things, you're making a declaration saying, I'm here for me. I'm here for my own healing. I'm here for my own well-being. I'm putting in time, energy, attention to this part of my life, and I am committing to my own highest good. So you just showing up here is powerful. It's a statement of your commitment to your own transcendence, and I'm so grateful you're here. My guest today is Lorrie Rivers. She's the founder of the Heal Advanced Recovery Program, and you can find her at laurieriversholistic.com. She has been an EFT tapping practitioner for over 20 years and is also certified in trilogy coaching. Laurie helps people to holistically and gently overcome chronic illness by addressing trauma, hidden infections, toxins, and more. Again, her website is laurieriversholistic.com. Laurie, it is so good to have you here.
Thank you, Dawson. I am just so excited to be here with you.
I was so moved to read your story of recovery from not one, but more than one long-term chronic illnesses. And as I was talking to you before we went live here, I was just struck by how much energy you have and how much vibrancy you have. And then the story about how you crashed is so powerful, and then losing that and then regaining that. Please do share that story with us.
Sure. I'll go to the most charged part of it, the most dramatic part of it, because there have been various iterations of it over the years. We were talking before the interview about being kind of born with fibromyalgia. So that was something that I experienced off and on throughout my whole life. But I just kind of took it as that's normal because nobody could figure out what was wrong or, in and out of hospitals as a child and doctors and all those things. But the thing that really hit me, kind of the crash that you're talking about there, is that I developed right out of college. I developed severe what's called MECFS. So if you're in the US, you probably know it as chronic fatigue syndrome. If you're in Europe, you probably know it as myalgic encephalomyelitis. And what that did is that it took me from living a very active life. I was actually working on major film sets and pursuing a career at that point in film. And it took me from doing things like that and running 3 miles several times a week to being bedbound, having to have my father feed me, having to have my boyfriend carry me to the bathroom. And I experienced that for about 10 years. And so that's how I spent my 20s. Now, I wasn't bedbound for that whole time, but it was off and on for a good bit of that. And, I'm also very humbled in sharing that experience because I'm sure that some of you who have joined us here have had similar experiences or, maybe even more difficult experiences. So when I share that with you, I certainly am not saying that my suffering is more than yours or anything like that. But I think it is a beautiful learning place when we have these intense experiences. So for me, I did come out of that. I started coaching people with chronic fatigue syndrome just a couple of years into that. I started doing tapping with them. That was one thing that I could do. It was on the phone at that point because the internet was just a baby, you know? And I found that I was getting some relief from using the EFT tapping or meridian tapping, and some of my clients had huge shifts, much bigger than what I was experiencing. So anyway, I did, I worked with people over those years, and then after I got well, I continued to coach people with the EFT tapping, but more and more people started coming to me with chronic illnesses. And then when the pandemic hit, I actually developed long COVID and I went, all right, and early on, and it felt almost exactly it did feel exactly like the chronic fatigue syndrome, just with some different flavors. And so I went, all right, my my inclination is to go out and see if doctors who are familiar with chronic fatigue syndrome think that this is going to end up being a part of the pandemic. And they did. And sure enough, more and more people started coming to me with long COVID. So I developed the HEAL program. And what I found within that was that the EFT, you know, addressing trauma, addressing emotions is key. Nervous system, right? All these things, also addressing hidden infections. Every single person who comes to me with these chronic illnesses has hidden infections as well because the immune system is compromised. So whether it started with trauma compromising the immune system, which we'll probably talk about later, or if it started with a pathogen or something else, these things all work together. So that's that's my story.
And did you then recover fully from long COVID?
Yeah, long COVID only took me 8 months to fully recover from because I knew what to do. So I followed my own program. Yeah, and that's what I teach other people to do so that they don't have to take so long. They don't have to take the 10 years that it took me to heal from the MECFS first time around.
And then with a new person, how do you know whether it's trauma, whether it's that hidden infection? What is the way you are able to figure out what the origin is of the condition?
Yeah, and I would actually say that it's always a combination. So we just start from there. Know that they're gonna be doing meridian tapping on trauma, even if it's little t trauma. It still builds up over time, and if it hasn't been properly processed, then it's going to affect us physically. There are always pathogens that are in there. So we always address that. There are always toxins. Because if somebody has chronic symptoms, then their body isn't able to properly take care of the pathogens, isn't properly able to take care of the toxins. So, yeah, so that's just something that we know is happening. Yeah.
And I guess as you start to look for it, you can see what that trauma is, how it shifts them. And then when people, I'm just really curious about this because I've wondered this myself. When they shift trauma, does that affect the pathogen because their biochemistry is changing. And what I do know a lot about, so I don't know the answer to that question at all, Laurie. What I do know though is when we tap and we shift our brain function, there are literally hundreds of downstream genes and hormones and enzymes that our bodies are shifting as we release those imprints of trauma. And so it's changing the biochemistry of the body. And I would assume making it less hospitable to pathogens.
Absolutely. Can we talk about cell danger response here? Because I think
Yeah.
this really illustrate it really well. So the work of Dr. Robert Navio, he coined the term cell danger response. And what happens in a cell danger response is something that is actually a good thing, but for reasons that we'll talk about, it can get stuck so that our bodies are in the cell danger response pretty much all the time. So let's talk about the mitochondria in the body first. You probably learned in school, as I did, that the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cells and of our bodies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
ATP and the whole energy cycle. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. What we weren't taught and what we now know happens is that when the cell danger response is triggered, and this can happen from trauma, it can happen from just stress in general. It can happen from pathogens, from toxins, from all these things that we know are negatively affecting us, right? But especially if we are not well equipped to deal with stress, then it sets off all these things, set off the cell danger response. So, in an ideal situation, maybe we're exposed to a virus or something like that. And so the cell danger response starts. Here's what happens on a cellular level when that happens. The mitochondria actually leave the cell. They stop producing energy. Their new job now is to signal the body, signal the immune system that it needs to fight something. So we don't have the mitochondria producing energy. You might think about when we are dealing with a virus or something like that, we get super fatigued, right? That's a big part of the reason. And typically, what happens is there are several phases in the cell danger response. The body is able to go through all these phases. In order to move to the next phase, the body has to know that certain things are being taken care of, right? So, in an ideal situation, it completes all those phases, it comes back to a normal, healthy cell, and the mitochondria comes back home and starts producing energy again. Where we get into chronic illness states is if the body enters cell danger response for whatever reason and gets stuck in one of those phases. And that's what happens in chronic illness. So the mitochondria are still out here signaling the body, we need to fight something, we need to take care of something. They're not able to provide that energy. And then there are other things involved in this, getting stuck in inflammation and things like that. When someone has not fully processed trauma and the nervous system is ramped up or in freeze state a good bit of the time, then the body doesn't the cells don't get that signal from the body that, "Oh, okay, it's okay to move on to the next phase of the cell danger response." So we just get stuck in there. So that's one of the things that happens in the body when trauma or pathogen or whatever happens. So in my heal program, we use the meridian tapping to resolve the trauma and to get the nervous system back into that rest, digest, heal state. And we also gently address hidden pathogens. We support the body with different supplements, and we get rid of toxins. So again, it all works together there.
And even though it works together, and I know that personally, I believe in using all of those ways of healing. So supplements, superfoods, diet, exercise, all of the above. And that's when you really are giving yourself the most possible support. But I'm just curious if you've ever had a client who, when you just solved the trauma piece with tapping, that produced an immediate shift in their biological state.
Yeah, I know that that has happened before. And I've had it happen with not an immediate shift, though. I've never seen that happen with the majority of the chronic. So most of the people that I work with have long COVID, have MECFS, but I do remember but I also work with other types of illnesses too. There was one woman who came to me, and this was very early on when I was in my tapping coaching journey, and she had severe ADHD and OCD, and to the point where she had been on medication for most of her life. And we went through I think she was with me for about 4 weeks, and she came back to me in week 5, and she said, "My doctor is taking me titrating me off of my medications for the first time in my life." And I think I was probably about 4 years into coaching tapping, and I was like, "This is magic." So it depends on the chronic illness. The things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome and things like that, there are usually other aspects that we do need to address. But hey, I am not opposed to a miracle, you know?
Be open to a miracle, and, the trauma piece also is easy to solve. Like, I know I have several friends with chronic illnesses, and, thinking of one in particular, and she's just been dealing with this for, like, 35 years. And she's tried all kinds of different things, and they worked a little bit. I mean, she's, reasonably functional, but it's just this constant, like, energy drain on her life to be dealing with this. And so she's looking for all of the different kinds of exposure she's had throughout her life. And then the emotional piece can be shifted so quickly. And just even seeing people with severe trauma, people with complex PTSD, and of course with EFT training, we're able to work effectively on even complex PTSD. It's not easy. I mean, it's not like this is a one session or 5 session cure, but even complex PTSD, the research shows usually with tapping takes under 10 sessions. And so then you've got that trauma piece handled. Then you can focus on all the other biological pieces that
Yeah, and what I will say, Dawson, is that I have worked with people who we address all the other things, but then I find out later on in the program that they have not been doing their tapping, that they haven't been addressing their trauma. We do that in our live sessions as well, but that they haven't been consistent with it so much. Then they do start doing it, and then that's when the shift happens. I think I've had that happen about 3 times with different people. So they're like, "Okay, we believe you now. With the tapping, we get it."
Yeah, I've been tapping for more than 25 years, and in my meditation this morning, I was tapping. I tap almost every morning. I tap sometimes during the day as well, and it's just so powerful to shift your mind, shift your body, shift your attitude, and it's just so quick, so easy, so simple to release any lingering subconscious stuff you have going on there. So it's great to clear all the old trauma, but I find that just tapping every day for balance and release of any subconscious stuff I might have going on is still very useful.
Absolutely. One of my favorite things to share with people about the tapping is because most of the people who come to me, their nervous system is so ramped up, right? And I mean, this was my experience as well because I personally dealt with a lot of trauma, recurring trauma in my childhood, and I didn't realize until way far into my journey how significant it was and how much it had contributed to my own experiences with illness. What I find with these people is that and with myself was that to be in that fight, flight, freeze space most of the time for your body, it wears it down. Absolutely. But the mind is also trained by that point to stay in that space of fight, flight, freeze. And so what part of the reason that it's so important to do it consistently when you are working to recover from a chronic illness is to change that pattern. So I know you're familiar with this study, but there was a study done with meridian tapping, EFT tapping, using an MRI before and after. And you probably know the specifics a lot better than I do, but it showed the part of the brain that triggers the fight, flight, freeze response, the amygdala. And it showed before and after tapping. So before the tapping, the amygdala was lit up like a Christmas tree. And then after however many minutes of tapping, and again, I don't you might know how many minutes, but afterwards, it was quiet. I don't think there were any lit up spots of the amygdala. So that's how powerful it is. But we do have to retrain those neural pathways to not automatically jump to fight, flight, freeze when it's not needed, you know? I mean, if you're driving on the road and somebody slams on the brakes in front of you, we want that fight, flight response, you know? But otherwise, just in our regular everyday lives, we want to be mostly in the rest, digest, heal state. So that's what happens over time.
Let's take a little bit of a exercise break here so we actually can operationalize this in our lives. So grab your journals, reflect on what Laurie is sharing with us here, and then ask yourself some probing questions. One of those is, where are there recurring patterns of a stress response in your life? Maybe you're doing okay in many different areas of your life, but there's some part of your life where there's a recurring stress response. Here you find that there's a person at work, maybe, who really triggers you. Maybe there's something that your partner says, your child says, your parents says, someone around you in your family or environment says that triggers you and that you then ruminate on. That's a good test for whether you can release it or not, because we either live in the present moment, and that's the mid prefrontal cortex part of the brain, or if we're obsessed by past wounds or future worries, the mid prefrontal cortex is highly focused then on the past and future. So, are you in the present moment or are you not? And what is it that pulls you out and that can drag you into that state of rumination about usually a past wound or past slight, something somebody said to you? So just make a note in your journal now. You can explore it later on, but for the moment, just write down, if it's a little movie, write down the movie title, When My Neighbor Lets His Dog Poop on My Lawn. Which my neighbor actually does do. And I just laugh because it's not no big deal, but every once in a while, my neighbor walks by and the dog poops on my rose garden. So, and as you can tell, I've done enough tapping to where I'm not totally traumatized about that. But what is it in you? Is there something that somebody says? Is there a topic that comes up that will really get you? So make a note of that in your journal. Where is that topic that is guaranteed to result in that amygdala activation that Laurie is referring to here? And then later on, you can reflect on that, do some tapping on it, and see about shifting those patterns. Because Laurie and I are both assuring you, you can shift them. We've seen people shift, and we've seen them shift even lifetime patterns of traumatic stress. So the research is clear with 200 clinical trials of EFT, and we've seen it work in huge numbers of populations, different kinds of people. And even after years of the stress response, you can learn to defuse that powder keg of negative emotion inside of you with tapping. So make your notes, and then we'll pick them up later on, and you can do some tapping, do some meditation, do some breathing, and see if you can let them go. Laurie, thanks for that really clear and beautiful example. And it is wonderful too to see people who have struggled with this for a long time be able to let all of that triggering go.
Yeah, and all of my students who do the tapping consistently, which I think all of them that I have that I'm working with right now do. So I'll give you an example. There's a lovely woman that I'm working with right now who she's in her 20s and she's just, bedbound a good bit of the time and really just not able to function. And I, of course, understand that from my own experience and how difficult that is. And she just has so much potential. And when she first came to me, you can just tell when you're talking to someone and their nervous system is super worked up, right? That you can tell that they're anxious, and her body was reactive to everything. She was able to eat 3 foods at that point and not react negatively to them. And even those, I don't know that her body was okay with them. But over time, and we actually with her, now that I'm thinking about it, because we weren't able to do any supplementation because her body was so reactive. We weren't able to do that for many, 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 many months because we found out later that she was living in mold. And so that was stopping everything. That's a whole other subject. But by doing the tapping, now when we interact, she's more at peace, she's calm, and she can recognize it. She says, my nervous system is so much better. And she's able to eat like 14, 15 foods now. So, that also is combined with a particular food eating plan that she was on and things like that. But no supplements there yet. So that really is from the tapping and the eating plan. And then another student that I currently have, same kind of thing when we first started working together. I think her shoulders were up here and I would frequently ask her to bring her energy down to her, just below her belly button and inside her body so that we could come back down. And she's been great about doing the tapping. And it's amazing to watch the progress that people have from the tapping and with their nervous system. She said, my adrenaline doesn't go up when things happen where normally in the past it would just shoot up and I would be super stressed out about things. I just don't get stressed about things as much anymore. I have another client who has an autistic child and um you know when she's chronically ill as well, that's super, that's a lot to deal with. And she said, I do still get stressed out, but it's so much less and I'm more able to address what needs to be addressed. So, like you were saying, I think earlier, even aside from past trauma that definitely we want to process, but even just the stressors of now, today, to be able to shift the nervous system there over time.
And then, of course, if you shift the nervous system today and tomorrow and the next day, it may take a while for it to calm down the way you're describing in these clients. But if you just consistently practice that day after day after day, gradually you reset to that new normal. And so you may find yourself in that high trauma response, reset yourself through tapping. Tomorrow you're back in the high trauma response, and 3 or 4 days later you still are going there, but then you're correcting. And so now your body is realizing, "Oh, there's another possibility."
Yes, and it feels better.
It feels better, feels way better.
Yes.
Yeah. Then get used to that as a new normal. Now, I'm curious about long COVID. I'm just, first of all, curious about when you realized you had long COVID, was that a big emotional blow?
I will tell you something, Dawson. Because I knew what it was, because I knew that it was MECFS, I spiraled for sure for about 3 days. But what was really cool was that about a day and a half into it, and let me just tell you the thoughts that were going on. I can't go through this again. I would rather die than go through this again. I don't know what to do. I can't believe this is happening to me. And then other expletives that I will not say right now because I don't know how your audience will respond. But what happened about a day and a half into it is all the work that I've done over the years, the tapping work, the meditation, the the consciousness, the ability to step back and be the observer rather than getting caught up in the story, that kicked in. So the thoughts were still there, but I was able to just watch them and say, okay, makes sense that you're having these thoughts. Yep, I hear you, mind. And then once that shifted, what started to gradually come in, you know, maybe later on in that day, on the third day, was, hey, you know what? I know what to do. And I don't know how long I'm going to be sick like this. But even if even if it's for the rest of my life, that's okay because I know how to be unconditionally happy. Not 100% of the time, but I know that I will be able to still live a full life even if I'm dealing with that. And it was so interesting, that part of the journey, because while I was dealing with the long COVID, it felt like I had an old friend staying over that I didn't really wanna be a friend anymore, right? But I knew what was going on. Whereas other people with long COVID, it's a when I first got ME/CFS, because of that, again, they're both post-viral syndromes. They're the same, they're one and the same. When I first got the ME/CFS and developed that, it was terrifying because I had no clue what was going on. The doctors didn't have any clue what was going on for years and years and years and years. No clue what was going on. Then again, once with long COVID, I was like, "All right, don't really want you staying here with me in my house, but you're here, so let's make the best of it."
Yeah, and those two responses are characteristic of what happens when we have resilience, when we don't. So the second time round, you had resilience, you had experience, and you could take that witness perspective. I'm going to ask us all now to do a bit more journaling and ask yourself this question. In which of the difficult areas of my life right now am I caught up in my story? Where in your life can you not take the witness perspective? Where in your life do you think this suffering person is me? So Lori could, after that first day and a half, could take the witness perspective and see the suffering person, and that suffering person maybe who'd be suffering that way the rest of her life. And because she knew it wasn't me, wasn't her, she could come to terms with that. So ask yourself that question. In which part of your life are you still caught up in the assumption that the suffering person is me? In what part of your life are you still caught up in the assumption that the suffering person is me? And just make a note of that. Again, you can explore that later in your journal, but just in two or three words, what is that part of your life? And then the next question to explore later on is, what would it take to shift my identity into that witness perspective? What would it take to shift my identity, my experience of who I am, into the witness perspective? So I'm seeing this person who has a chronic illness. I'm seeing this person who is suffering. I'm seeing this person who's had an accident, a misfortune, who has been traumatized, who's had maybe terrible violence done to them or has done terrible violence to somebody else. So where where in my life am I there, and what would it take to shift me to that witness perspective? And again, this is a highly personal answer for you. And we've been giving a lot of tools and ideas and techniques and recommendations here: tapping, meditation, time in nature, grounding, breathing. There are so many things you can do that engage the body's ability to restore itself. Of course, there are all the other kinds of approaches that Laurie says are essential in diet, nutrition, exercise, lifestyle, and so on. So, what will it take you to shift? What's your next step in shifting yourself into that witness perspective to where you aren't all caught up in that suffering self, that suffering story? Because I tell you, without even knowing you, that you are far more than your story. Life sees you as far more than your story. The universe sees you as far more than your story. The infinite sees you as being fellow infinite. So, how do you move to the perspective on you that the universe has on you, seeing yourself as that being from that witness perspective. Well worth considering that particular way out.
Dawson, that is so powerful. Such great questions. I'm gonna have my people do that too. We do that in different ways, but you put it very succinctly. So that was beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, we do all have stories, and at times it's necessary to let them go to heal. So, have you found there are clients who just cling to the old story, who won't let go? I'm thinking of one guy in my men's group. I've known him for a few years, and he's just so stuck in his story, Lori. He is never gonna go anywhere else, as far as I can tell. So, have you had people like that?
I have. There's one particularly right now that I'm thinking of. But I think that so they experienced consistent trauma with a big T during childhood for years and I think for their whole childhood. And I think that makes it a lot harder to let go of that story. And I think that there also can be this thing of I think it's a part of the process, this thing of needing to own that and making it a part of their identity as a part of the process. So what I find when someone like that comes to me is that tapping is the way through that. That at first it feels offensive even to suggest that it's a story because because of how intense what they experienced was. And I totally get that. I remember, oh my gosh, so funny. My first coach, I think, when I was so sick, she said, "So Lori, why do you think you're creating this in your life?" And I didn't know anything about law of attraction or anything like that at that point. And I went, "You're fired." It's like I stink and create this. Why would I do that? And so now that's a whole other thing. And I don't want for anybody to feel like I'm saying that you consciously created this in your life or that, any of that stuff. So, but there is a space where when we've done the tapping and when we have processed the old trauma, especially that recurring trauma, where we can take that step back. And it's such a relief. It's such a relief to be able to say that that's not who I am. And it's such a relief to the body.
Yeah. To realize that. Yeah, I did a series of sessions with a lot of fibromyalgia patients at one point in my career, and that question you definitely would not want to ask somebody at especially near the beginning of any kind of coaching or healing relationship. But what I found them telling me was how fibromyalgia carried some kind of hidden benefit for them. Like one of them had a very, very close family, and then her brother had married somebody in their town, and this woman didn't like her, and so she had this poor relationship with her sister-in-law, and it really was a source of grief to her. And there were a lot of family gatherings in this very small town they all lived in, and so she had to be there with her sister-in-law and kind of suffer through her sister-in-law's behavior toward her. And when she got fibromyalgia, she said, because I asked her, when do you have the most flare-ups? When your symptoms get the worst? And she said, "No, I didn't have to think of it. Just before family gatherings." And if I'm laid out, I can't go. So she came to realize that there was some benefit to her in maintaining that condition. So that's another thing to ask ourselves is, how is this helping me? And you may look at some part of your life and saying, I hate this. It's not helping me at all. I didn't cause this. I don't want this. I want this to be gone. I want to be rid of this problem. And it's nevertheless worth asking yourself, how is there some hidden way, some subconscious way in which this is benefiting me? It may be obvious, maybe not. And again, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it's just a random thing that happens. So you may be digging a dry well and find no big insight there. But with all those fibromyalgia patients, I was so struck, Laurie, by that the EFT would call that secondary gain. There's some kind of secondary gain going on there. And every single one of them would eventually tell me about some secondary benefit they had to this disease.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that you brought that up because we do address that in the program. And, one of I mentioned earlier a couple of students who hadn't been doing it consistently and they just weren't fully healing. And one of them actually realized when we started talking about secondary gains and when she actually started doing the tapping, she had grown up in an environment where her mother had been verbally and emotionally abusive to her. But she realized when she was very young that when she was sick, her mother was a lot easier on her and, in fact, would be kind to her and take care of her. And so what we realized was that she had brought that into her current life, and she was in her 30s or 40s, I think, when we were working together. So she addressed all that trauma from the past and what she experienced there and that secondary gain, and very, very gradually that did start to shift because, when we're kids and we're being hurt and we find something unconsciously, subconsciously that works to make that better, then that gets stuck in there, So it becomes it's not safe for me to be well, becomes that belief that's in there. And most of the time we don't know that it's there. But she tapped on that, and sure enough, that's when things shifted for her. Now she'd done a lot of other work. She'd addressed hidden infections and all that good stuff beforehand, but that was the final key for her.
And then you can begin to find healthy ways of getting your needs met that don't rely on hurting yourself, getting sick, self-injury, debilitation, all of those negative consequences. And you just find healthy ways of of supporting yourself. So this is our last journaling exercise before we end today. And I want you to ask yourself, think about some situation in your life that's unsatisfactory, that's been causing you unhappiness or pain. Could be a mental issue, it could be a physical issue, could be chronic, could be acute. And ask yourself, is there a possibility that there's a hidden subconscious way in which this is serving me? Is there some hidden subconscious way in which this problem is actually helping me, contributing to my life in some way? So write that down and think about it. Doesn't hurt to ask the question. The answer might be no. It could be, just a strongly genetically encoded disease, for example, that has no link to anything else. But we find, for example, that even strongly encoded genetic diseases are often influenced by stress. Stress exacerbates them. So we find that they can be triggered by stress. So it's worth asking yourself this deep question. So I'm just curious as we wrap up, Laurie, what does your personal self-care routine look like each day, each week?
Mine's a bit extensive, Dawson. So I love waking up super early in the morning. I kind of naturally get up around 3:30 or 4 a.m. and I do some meditation. I do my tapping. I do some rebounding if you're familiar with little trampolines. And what else do? I take a whole bunch of supplements still. I do that for sure. I start my water distiller because that's an important part of keeping ourselves healthy in these days. And then I do my exercise. Sometimes I walk first and sometimes I do my high intensity workouts first. But I make sure that I get outside. Oh, and I also do red light in the morning. And then I also make sure that I get some vitamin D during the day. So I lie in the sun and just soak in the rays. That's the abridged version.
That
And
sounds
I
wonderful.
yeah, and I want people to know too that you don't have to do as extensive, ritual as what I do. That's just what feeds me personally.
Yeah, and we all figure out what works for our bodies and adapt. But you're making time for self-care on a daily basis, and it's so powerful to do that. And so I think I'm gonna throw in one more self-reflection exercise here, and I'm gonna ask you, in what way are you neglecting self-care? So you know already, and again, this is between you and your journal. It's confidential, but in what way are you neglecting self-care? And that might be emotional. You might be hanging out with people who you know are not a good influence on you, don't make you feel good. It might be a physical source of support you're neglecting. Maybe you aren't getting enough exercise. Maybe you aren't getting outdoors enough. Maybe you're not giving your body something you know it needs, movement, flexibility. So, what is the part of your life in which you know you are neglecting self care? And then just reflect on that and consider what you might do to shift that. And Lori, what would you recommend as like the minimum people do initially to shift a pattern like that? If they don't have a lot of time, money, resources, how can they, what's the smallest thing they can do to shift an area where they are not giving themselves the self-care they deserve?
Tapping.
Nothing.
It's free. It's so easy to do. There are tons of videos online. I do have a tapping course for chronic illnesses as well that you can purchase. But, if you don't have the money, then just take a look online. There's some great tapping videos out there. And anytime you notice that you're not feeling great, I do it when I'm walking around, I do it when I'm in the car, I do it all the time. That's the easiest place to start.
Yeah, it's been funny for me to walk around and see people tapping in their cars once in a while. You'll see other people tapping sometimes as well. So it's catchy on. Laurie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your high energy, your solutions, and your really multifaceted approach to healing. It's powerful and a great reminder that we are multifaceted beings, emotional, physical, spiritual, mental, and it's worth taking care of every part, every dimension of who we are. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Dawson. It's been an honor.
And till next time, just keep reflecting on those journaling questions. I'll see you again in the next episode. Till then, fill your life and your mind and your heart with love.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. Talks. We hope today's episode has enlightened and inspired you on your path to optimal health. Each day is a new opportunity to make choices that empower your well-being. For more insights and strategies, subscribe to our podcast and visit our website, www.drtalks.com. Stay connected, stay healthy, and join us next time on Dr. Talks, real talks from real doctors on the issues that matter to you most.